everybody. Welcome to Thrive Thursday. So every Thursday we have one of our coaches writing an article and we send it out in our weekly newsletter so that everybody gets a little tidbit and some insights and information about something that might help them out in the world. Lori's article this week was called Receiving Feedback. It's something that we've been talking a lot about in our office recently, and I would love Lori to explain a little bit more about it and share with you kind of some really cool thoughts that she has on it.
Well, what's interesting is I find that in our office we'll start talking about something and then it starts showing up in our lives and it's like in our face and then we have to do something about it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we've talked about on and off were feedback. And then of course we go out to the clients and all of a sudden we're getting all this feedback from a client, and my daughter earlier in the year happened to be struggling with an issue also of receiving feedback. So then it just started coming into my awareness and I'm like, okay, what is feedback for me? And so then I start playing in the space of feedback. And so what I was realizing, and what I first started realizing with my daughter, was when she received it, she always went into, I'm not enough, I'm failing. So she looked at feedback as a way to beat herself up and where she was doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
And I found that if I would preface it, and as I write in the article, some intention setting with, this isn't meant to, take away from the work you've done or take away from what you've accomplished, but I just want to give you a little more insight. Or sometimes she would solicit it from me and say, Mom, what are your thoughts on? And then I'd give it to her, and then she'd be all mad. And I'm like, you asked for my opinion. This is just my opinion. You don't have to take it. And so another thing I mentioned in the article is discernment. This is just my opinion. It's coming through my filter. You asked me my opinion. I'm giving it to you. And then what was interesting is the other component is we were in a client, and the client was telling us how her boss gave her some feedback, and it was really curt, and she took it personally, like, I just don't have the skills, I'm not smart enough. And so what I realized is people don't, not necessarily challenge the feedback, and I think how I list it as ask clarifying questions.
Yes.
So exactly. When you receive that feedback, instead of, I'm not smart enough, I can't do this job, I'm not doing enough, ask the clarifying questions. I took it this way. Is that really what you intended for me? Because that's how I'm receiving it. Because chances are they didn't mean for it to come across that way. Mm-hmm. So I really go into just clarifying what it is you're hearing when you're receiving feedback.
Right.
So as a receiver, I want to make sure I'm receiving it the way it was meant, because we all have different language styles. Mm-hmm. So your style, my husband's style, is very forceful and stern, and it sounds like he's insulting you whenever he gives it, and that's not his intention. Mm-hmm. So he would be a good person to use clarifying with. Did you intend for it to come across, or was this your intention behind the feedback?
There were a couple things that really stood out for me in the article. One was the thought that, oftentimes, especially in organizations, we're taught how to give feedback, but we're not always taught how to receive it. We're not always taught, like, wow, if that triggers something in you and that thing that it triggers, you already spoke about the fact that it could trigger, I'm not good enough, but there's also a trigger that could happen, like, going back at the person that was giving the feedback and saying, well, that's not true, and
you suck. No, you suck. No, you suck worse.
Exactly. Exactly. And so how what I'm hearing is, how do we give and receive constructive feedback? Because there's so much value in it.
Absolutely.
So much value in it. And we don't live in a silo. We don't live in our own little world. We live in connection with others. And sometimes we have to understand how to interact with each other in ways that don't always feel the most comfortable. Mm-hmm. And so I love that you brought up the other side of feedback, which is the receiving side of it. And we always go from that place of HIOS where, what is it that it triggered in you? And the example that you gave, triggered, I'm not good enough. So being aware of what's happening internally in your system, and what, and then have an awareness around that trigger, and then navigate that a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. I love this article. It took me two places. So the first place was looking at myself coming up through the school system and receiving the feedback of grades, and now the perspective I'm able to give my daughter on what those grades are and what they can do for you. And I credit being able to do that with the work here that we do at Thrive. It also took me to my first job out of college. right? This was not something that was taught in my degree work
Right.
for public relations. And then they set you loose in the world for your first job, and you work your first year and you work your butt off. And I remember the first month of my first job, I went home crying every night because I didn't know how to receive the feedback I was getting to better myself, to propel myself, to build myself in my career. I was taking it completely personally. And so to be able to have the idea that you can use this for you and you can decide how you want to use it for you.
That's what I love.
The reason that the person is giving you the feedback, they have their own intention behind it, and you can take that and discern it and be respectful of that. But then, yes, making sure that you look at how is this for me,
Right, and then
regardless of their intention.
Right, and then maybe that helps you have the next level conversation with that person where you both can talk about it. And I loved where in the article when you talked about the, how do we get to these clarifying questions, or that's one opportunity for you to become a learner mindset and learn and discern and be able to actually utilize this for yourself. And it's like, okay, great. Once you get that discernment piece, now you can say, what is mine? What do I think is valuable? And what do I actually need to challenge and question in all of this?
Yeah, because especially being the receiver, okay, you've given me all this feedback. I may not agree with all of it.
Exactly.
And some of it, okay, and part of the clarifying is, okay, my perspective is this, your perspective is that. Let's see where the gap is, because obviously I'm not perceiving this the way you are. So it kind of helps you open it up a little bit more so that you don't have to just take the feedback at face value.
Right.
In my opinion, feedback is to open communication to see what can be done differently. And it may not, you receive positive feedback too. So oftentimes receiving feedback that's positive is great. What are the key things I'm doing right? I can keep doing those.
Right.
And so it's also to kind of reinforce, and it's what we do when we go into businesses. What are you doing right?
Well,
do more of that.
Yeah, and just as difficult as negative feedback is, sometimes positive feedback is difficult for people to take. How many times do you deflect off of somebody that's giving you positive feedback and you're like, oh, no, like, I didn't really do that, so-and-so, but it really was yours, and it really, and so there is also that side of it of how do you receive positive feedback, not just negative feedback,
and owning it,
and gracefully, and being able to own it, and
There was an example of that. I don't mean to bring up TV, but that is sort of what I like. So there's a great new show with a late night TV host that has retired, and he's now out with a new show where he just interviews one-on-one. And of course, the people who he's interviewing are effusive with their positive feedback of him, and he cannot take it.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to witness that dynamic.
So let's talk a little bit about the discernment of positive feedback too, and receiving that. What can you take? Because sometimes that can feel a little bit overwhelming when somebody's coming at you so strong with positive feedback. And so I think it's my experience of it is it's not that much different than receiving negative feedback in terms of the discernment component of it. How much of it do you want to take on and own and actually use to better yourself out in the world, or even to just have a better experience of life, because wow, you know what, that person said that, now I get to discern whether or not I feel that's true, and if it is true, now you're really grounded in it, and now you can move through life feeling pretty darn good.
Yeah, and powerful questions are good in that instance too. If someone's giving you positive feedback, clarifying, what exactly did I do that made you think that? Because sometimes having those specifics helps you.
Exactly.
When you're doing more of it, or trying to overcome different, or just doing more of it. But the other aspect of that comes into play is sometimes when you're receiving positive feedback, is sometimes it might seem inauthentic.
Right.
So there have been times when I've been given positive feedback and you're like, it just didn't feel good.
And that's where the discernment comes in,
Yeah, like, are you just saying this because you have to, or it seems like the right thing to say, or do you genuinely mean it?
Right. And that's why it's so nice to be able to go back internally and ask yourself, okay, even though that felt disingenuous, is it actually true for me? And if it's true for me, cool. Who cares if it was disingenuous?
Right, yeah, I like
You know what
that.
I mean?
Who cares where it came from
Right.
to you? It feels really
Right.
good here, so I'm going to take it and own it.
Right,
Yeah.
and if it, because it's really not about the other person at all. It's
Absolutely.
really always, it's really about bringing it back to yourself and really deciding, if you want to use this external thing as an opportunity for you to experience life in a better way and to know yourself a little bit better.
And I like what you said. That is completely it for me with receiving feedback or giving feedback. It's really not about the other person.
Yeah.
It's in this exchange. How do I want to be in it? Who do I want to be in it? What do I want to receive from it? How do I
Right.
want this? Because that's the only part of you can control.
Right.
So it is about you. And so when you're getting something positive or negative, that's why clarifying, powerful questions come into play, because now if something doesn't feel right or it feels off or I'm not quite getting it, now I can ask, are you meaning it to be that way, or I'm receiving it this way, is that what you intended?
Yeah.
But so you can get really clear on it when you're doing it for yourself. But so oftentimes, especially with feedback, as a receiver, we think it's my boss or it's my
Right.
parent, and I just need to listen and take this feedback. So I think that's why we go into a negative place, because they're just dumping all the stuff they don't like about me.
Right, right.
And that's typically what society has done with feedback. It's,
Absolutely.
you need to change these things about you because...
So if there was one thing that you guys want everybody to walk away, from this concept, what would that thing be?
For me, I wish that I had known when I was in the corporate world
Yeah.
that I had known that I had the right and permission and responsibility
I love
to
that.
ask those clarifying questions and to take feedback if I wanted to at face value or to use it. I always would take it personally, and I believe that added on to my I am not good enough. And so even when I would get the positive feedback, it wouldn't reverse that for me, or it wouldn't stoke me
Sure.
to know that I am good enough and I am doing a good job. And so I wish I had known that. And so
Cool.
that's what I would underline.
Awesome. Love
Yeah.
that.
And mine goes along with what you're saying. It's maintaining, as a receiver, I can maintain my power in this feedback. It is not something that's being pushed on me. I can still decide in that moment how I'm going to respond to what I'm receiving. So oftentimes we kind of lose that
Yeah.
component of it. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, I'm a contributor in this exchange, even though I'm receiving it. And I can participate in what's going on.
Awesome.
And I'd also like to throw out there that I have experienced in employee evaluations and performance reviews and all of that thing, the dread component. Even if you know that your manager normally gives you positive feedback,
Yeah.
it's always that sense and cloud of dread.
Right.
And so to be able to go in and say, I can receive this feedback and I can discern for myself what it means for me in my position in my job and my company, and then move forward from there with it, is very empowering.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's why I go into set your intention. And part of it being, how do I want to receive this? What do I want to do with it? What do I want to look for in it? So I'm not just focusing on the negative. So if you go in there with a clear intention, you can receive feedback completely differently.
Yes.
Awesome. So thanks so much for being here today. If you love all of these conversations that we've been putting out there for you and for us, because we love doing this, check us out on thrivehdc.com. We have all of our articles up on our blog on our website. We also have a couple programs coming up this fall. We always have programs going on. So we have our HPT, which is our Human Progress Training Program, and our Human Influencer Training Program, which we lovingly call HIT. And those both start at the end of September. If you're intrigued, check us out, thrivehdc.com. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.